Day, December 19th, 2021.
I put the cogs into the box and then I've got another load. After a while my arms will get tired and then this job will blow. But I could be replaced by a machine that does my work in half the time. But I don't know where I'd go, 'cause I prefer putting cogs into the box. Now I've got another load. Only just a few more hours and then I'm free to go. But I can't cease in questioning if I really have a home. It makes me sick to think of it, 'cause I prefer
Who's the guy who conquers death? The mister with the whispers when Mumbo forgets. After introducing Pearl and Gem to say we're settling a continent. Shoulder to shoulder, surrounded by water, beyond which reset, risk your face if you wanna. We live close, we build close, we speak in proximity. Season 8's here today, still in its infancy. Mumbo is saying go, everyone's cheering, suddenly scattering, always unfearing. Though it passed by without Mumbo mentioning, there's a crew, you know who to keep you adventuring. Asuma securing villagers, Pearl on fine architecture, mentioning grabbing supplies, ready to throw at the first fools who die. Bring on the creepers, bring on the flames. The resupply crew will get you going again. The very first to die, B-double-O, don't cry. Pops and Quay chagrin, takes some apples and he flies. Zombie Cleo's next, needs an axe for the road. Geared up and cheered up, she's off with some blows. Gemini Tay appears slain by Jevin, but B-dubs is back before Joe loads the first chest in. Then Pearl's killed by Cleo, who Joe had armed previously. Then Cleo's dead too, per Isco mischievously. Impulse SV got blown up by a creeper. Says he won't be back, but how can he be sure? Bring on the creepers, bring on the flames. The resupply crew will get you going again. The resupply crew. Asuma laddering a mine shaft. The resupply crew. Pearl egging a shell. The resupply crew. Joe lavaing a portal. Yo, you're immortal, here's a doorway to hell.
Who's the guy? Who's the guy?
Who's the guy who struck his first die encircled suddenly by three of his friends? Tango, Corrales, and B-double-O, all armed and armored to shake down Joe. Threats bacon triplicate fully surrounded. Joe took to the sky with Cobble unbounded. Lava to dump on the brigands below, or on himself. This direction, let's go! Heading down to somewhere with coordinates in hand. Bridging and a tunneling connecting flower forest land. Cleo is away, so Joe leaves her a saddle. He hopes as he does she won't use it for battle. Returning to world spawn and lighting his tunnel, he keeps striking lava and dies a whole bundle. And drowns hunting squids, though he tried his best. But no worries, back at world spawn there's a resupply chest. Bring on the creepers, bring on the flames. The resupply crew will get you going again. One chest becomes four, labeled in stock. The shell thickens yet with smooth sandstone block. Bushes are placed, ravines are filled in. Also the hermits could keep adventuring. If dying is losing, then living is winning. Episode's done, but the show's just beginning. Pick up some tools, some potatoes and steak, and show 'em you're real, give 'em season 8.
The summer is past, but your days keep growing longer. There's no wind in your sails, but the storm's blowing stronger. Walking hard, standing tall, keeping your Just let your mind flow downstream. Spread out in a moonbeam. Lay your head down and dream.
Unmuting myself. Oh, they can hear me say that.
Joe Hills is filmed before a live streaming audience.
That's us. Howdy, y'all. Joe Hills here, recording as I always do in Nashville, Tennessee. And this evening, y'all are my live streaming audience. Joining me today in slot 7 is Mr. Hardluck. Go ahead and say howdy, Mr. Hardluck.
Howdy, Mr. Hardluck.
Glad to have you here joining us for Stave 3 of our annual reading of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. It's a holiday classic. Whether or not you celebrate Christmas, I feel like Charles Dickens is such a talented writer that this work deserves a listen. And I hope you will join us tonight. It is fantastic having Mr. Hardluck here. He is a wrestler who does all sorts of on-stage performances or in-the-ring performances. I don't know what you call them. What do you call them, Mr. Hardluck?
I call them wrestling matches.
Wrestling matches, whatever. Yeah, don't play with wrestling matches, kids. You'll burn your house down. But this man is a qualified professional. So anyway, you can find Mr. Hardluck on the YouTube channel and the Twitch channel. I just linked there, twitch.tv/Mr. Hardluck. I feel like we should go ahead and just jump right in. But before we do, I need to remind folks, tips are welcome via paypal.me/JoeHills and YouTube Super Chat. I've got the abacus here. We are doing face camera expansions tonight, but I'm not going to promise I'm going to get to your tips right away. I'm going to, look for breaks in the text. I don't want to ruin the beautiful thing that Charles Dickens wrote here. Even though it's in the public domain, and that means everyone else can, that doesn't mean that I should. But if you do support the show tonight, you will be recognized at a time of my own choosing. Now, of course, the ghost of Christmas Present isn't going to arrive immediately in the story, so thank you, Mr. Hardluck, for being a little bit patient until we get to you. He's giving a big thumbs up there. Hopefully you can see it. If you want the camera to be bigger, though, once again, face camera expansions, $20 milestones. That'll expand both of our cameras. So, okay. I'm ready to just jump right in to Stave 3 of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Anything else to say before we go, Mr. Hardluck?
Nope, nothing here. Let's get to it.
Okay. So here we go. Stave 3, the second of the three spirits. Ooh. Awaking in the middle of a prodigiously tough snore and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told that the bell was again on the stroke of 1. He felt that he was restored to consciousness in the right nick of time for the especial purpose of holding a conference with the second messenger dispatched to him through Jacob Marley's intervention. But finding that he turned uncomfortably cold when he began to wonder which of his curtains this new specter would draw back, he put them every one aside with his own hands, and lying down again, established a sharp lookout all round the bed. For he wished to challenge the spirit on the moment of its appearance, and did not wish to be taken by surprise and made nervous. Gentlemen of the free and easy sort, who plume themselves on being acquainted with a move or two, and being usually equally to the time of day, express the wide range of their capacity for adventure by observing that they are good for anything from pitch and toss to manslaughter, between which opposite extremes, no doubt, there lies a tolerably wide and comprehensive range of subjects. Without venturing for Scrooge quite as heartily as this, I don't mind calling on you to believe that he was ready for a good broad field of strange appearances, and that nothing between a baby or a rhinoceros would have astonished him very much. Now, being prepared for almost anything, he was not by any means prepared for nothing, and, consequently, when the bell struck 1 and no shape appeared, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour went by, yet nothing came. All this time he lay upon his bed, the very core and center of a blaze of ruddy light, which streamed upon it when the clock proclaimed the hour, and which, being only light, was more alarming than a dozen ghosts, as he was powerless to make out what it meant, or would be at, and was sometimes apprehensive that he might at that very moment an interesting case of spontaneous combustion be, without having the consolation of knowing it. At last, however, he began to think, as you or I would have thought at first, for it is always the person not in the predicament who knows what ought to have been done in it, and would unquestionably have done it too. At last, I say, he began to think that the source and secret of this ghostly light might be in the adjoining room, from whence, on further tracing it, it seemed to shine. This idea taking full possession of his mind, he got up softly and shuffled in his slippers to the door. The moment Scrooge's hand was upon the lock, a strange voice called him by name and bade him enter. He obeyed. It was his own room. There was no doubt about that. But it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove, from every part of which bright gleaming berries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light, as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as that dull petrification of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time, or Marley's, or for many a winter season gone. Heaped up on the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12 cakes, and seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam. In easy state upon this couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch, in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it up, high up, to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door.
"Come in!"
exclaimed the ghost.
"Come in and know me better, man!"
Scrooge entered timidly and hung his head before the spirit. He was not the dogged Scrooge he had been, and though the spirit's eyes were clear and kind, he did not like to meet them.
"I am the ghost of Christmas present,"
said the spirit.
"Look upon me."
Scrooge reverently did so. It was clothed in one simple green robe or mantle, bordered in white fur. This garment hung so loosely on the figure that its capacious breast was bare, as if disdaining to be warded or concealed by artifice. Its feet, observable beneath the ample folds of the garment, were also bare, and on its head it wore no other covering than a holly wreath, set here and there with shining icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free as its genial face, its sparkling eye, its open hand, its cheery voice, its unconstrained demeanor, and its joyful air. Girded round its middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and the ancient sheath was eaten up with rust.
"You have never seen the like of me before?"
exclaimed the spirit. "Never," Scrooge made answer to it.
"Have never walked forth with younger members of my family, meaning, for I'm very young, my elder brothers born in these later years?"
pursued the phantom. "I don't think I have. I am afraid I have not. Have you many brothers, Spirit?
More than 1,800.
Said the ghost. A tremendous family to provide for, muttered Scrooge. The ghost of Christmas Present rose. Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learnt a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it.
Touch my robe.
Scrooge did as he was told, and held fast. Holly, mistletoe, red berries, ivy, turkey, geese, game, poultry, brawn, meat, pigs, sausages, oysters, pies, puddings, fruit, and punch all vanished instantly. So did the room, the fire, the ruddy glow, the hour of the night, and they stood in the city streets on Christmas morning, where, for the weather was severe, the people made a rough but brisk and not unpleasant kind of music in scraping the snow from the pavement in front of their dwellings, from the tops of their houses, whence it was mad delight to the boys to see it come plumping down into the road below, splitting into artificial little snowstorms. The house fronts looked black enough, and the windows blacker, contrasting with the smooth white sheet of snow upon the roofs, and with the dirtier snow upon the ground, which last deposit had been plowed up in deep furrows by the heavy wheels of carts and wagons, furrows that crossed and recrossed each other hundreds of times, where the great streets branched off and made intricate channels hard to trace in the thick yellow mud and icy water. The sky was gloomy, and the shortest streets were choked up with a dingy mist, half thawed, half frozen, whose heavier particles descended in a shower of sooty atoms, as if all the chimneys in Great Britain had, by one consent, caught fire, and were blazing away to their dear heart's content. There was nothing very cheerful in the climate of the town, and yet there was an air of cheerfulness abroad that the clearest summer air and brightest summer sun might have endeavored to diffuse in vain. For the people who were shoveling away on the housetops were jovial and full of glee, calling out to one another from the parapets, and now and then exchanging a facetious snowball, better-natured missile, far than many a wordy jest, laughing heartily if it went right, and not less heartily if it went wrong. The poulterers' shops were still half open, and the fruiterers were radiant in their glory. There were great round pot-bellied baskets of chestnuts, shaped like the waistcoats of jolly old gentlemen, lolling at the doors and tumbling out into the street in their apoplectic opulence. There were ruddy, brown-faced, broad-girthed Spanish onions, shining in the fatness of their growth like the Spanish friars, and winking from the shelves in wanton slyness at the girls as they went by and glanced demurely at the hung-up mistletoe. There were pears and apples clustered high in blooming pyramids. There were bunches of grapes made in the shopkeeper's benevolence to dangle from conspicuous hooks that people's mouths might water gratis as they passed. There were piles of filberts mossy and brown, recalling in their fragrance ancient walks among the woods, and pleasant shufflings ankle-deep through withered leaves. There were Norfolk biffins, squat and swarthy, setting off the yellow of the oranges and lemons, and, in the great compactness of their juicy persons, urgently entreating and beseeching to be carried home in paper bags and eaten after dinner. The very gold and silver fish set forth among these choice fruits in a bowl, though members of a dull and stagnant-blooded race, appeared to know that there was something going on, and, to a fish, went gasping round and round their little world in slow and passionless excitement. The grocers, nearly closed with perhaps 2 shutters down or 1, but through those gaps such glimpses. It was not alone that the scales descending on the counter made a merry sound, or that the twine and roller parted company so briskly, or that the canisters were rattled up and down like juggling tricks, or even that the blended scents of tea and coffee were so grateful to the nose, or even that the raisins were so plentiful and rare, the almonds so extremely white, the sticks of cinnamon so long and straight, the other spices so delicious, the candied fruits so caked and spotted with molten sugar as to make the coldest lookers-on feel faint and subsequently bilious. Nor was it that the figs were moist and pulpy, or that the French plums blushed in modest tartness from their highly decorated boxes, or that everything was good to eat and in its Christmas dress. But the customers were all so hurried and so eager in the hopeful promise of the day that they tumbled against each other at the door, crashing their wicker baskets wildly, and left their purchases upon the counter, and came running back to fetch them, and committed hundreds of the like mistakes in the best humor possible. While the grocer and his people were so frank and fresh that the polished hearts with which they fastened their aprons behind might have been their own, worn outside for general inspection and for Christmas dolls to peck at, if they chose. But soon the steeples called, "Good people all," to church and chapel, and away they came, flocking through the streets in their best clothes and with their gayest faces. And at the same time there emerged from scores of by-streets, lanes, and nameless turnings innumerable people carrying their dinners to the bakers' shops. The sight of these poor revelers appeared to interest the spirit very much, for he stood with Scrooge beside him in a baker's doorway, and taking off the covers as their bearers passed, sprinkled incense on their dinners from his torch. And it was a very uncommon kind of torch, for once or twice, when there were angry words between some dinner carriers who had jostled each other, he shed a few drops of water on them from it, and their good humor was restored directly. For they said it was a shame to quarrel upon Christmas Day, and so it was. God love it, so it was. In time the bells ceased and the bakers were shut up, and yet there was a genial shadowing forth of all these dinners and the progress of their cooking in the thawed blotch of wet above each baker's oven, where the pavement smoked as if its stones were cooking too. "Is there a peculiar flavor in what you sprinkle from your torch?" asked Scrooge.
There is my own.
"Would it apply to any kind of dinner on this day?" asked Scrooge.
To any kindly given, to the poor one most.
"Why to the poor one most?" asked Scrooge.
Because it needs it most, yeah.
"Spirit, I wonder, you, of all the beings in the many worlds about us, should desire to cramp these people's opportunities of innocent enjoyment."
Aye,
cried the spirit. "You would deprive them of their means of dining every 7th day, often the only day on which they could be said to dine at all, wouldn't you?"
aye,
cried the spirit. "You seek to close these places on the 7th day, and it comes to the same thing,"
I seek.
exclaimed the spirit. "Forgive me if I am wrong. It has been done in your name, or at least in that of your family," said Scrooge.
There are some upon this earth of yours
returned the spirit.
who lay claim to know us, and who do their deeds of passion and pride, ill will, hatred, envy, bigotry, and selfishness in our name, who are as strange to us and all our kith and kin as if they had never lived. Remember that, and charge their doings on themselves, not us.
Scrooge promised that he would, and they went on, invisible, as they had been before, into the suburbs of the town. It was a remarkable quality of the ghost, which Scrooge had observed at the baker's, that notwithstanding his gigantic size, he could accommodate himself to any place with ease, and that he stood beneath a low roof quite as gracefully and like a supernatural creature as it was possible he could have done in any lofting hall. And perhaps it was the pleasure the good spirit had in showing off this power of his, or else it was his own kind, generous, hearty nature, and his sympathy with all poor men, that led him straight to Scrooge's clerk's. For there he went, and took Scrooge with him, holding to his robe, and on the threshold of the door the spirit smiled, and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinkling of his torch. Think of that! Bob had been but 15 bob a week himself. He pocketed on Saturdays but 15 copies of his Christian name, and yet the ghost of Christmas present blessed his 4-room house. Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, dressed out but poorly in a twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons, which are cheap and make a goodly show for 6 pence, and she laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes, and, getting the corners of his monstrous shirt collar, Bob's private property, conferred upon his son, in honor of the day, into his mouth, rejoiced to find himself so gallantly attired, and yearned to show his linen in the fashionable parks. And now 2 smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose and known it for their own, and basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onion, these young Cratchits danced about the table and exalted Master Peter Cratchit to the skies, while he, not proud, although his colors nearly choked him, blew the fire until the slow potatoes bubbling up knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled. "What has ever got your precious father, then?" said Mrs. Cratchit, "and your brother Tiny Tim, and Martha warn't as late last Christmas Day by half an hour?" "Here's Martha, mother," said a girl, appearing as she spoke. "Here's Mother, mother," cried the 2 Cratchits. "Hurrah! That's such a goose, Martha!" "Why, bless your heart alive, my dear, how late you are," said Mrs. Cratchit, kissing her a dozen times. And taking off her shawl and bonnet with an officious zeal. "We'd a deal of work to finish up last night," replied the girl, "and to clear away this morning, mother." "Well, never you mind as long as you are calm," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Sit ye down before the fire, my dear, and have a warm, Lord bless ye." No, there's father coming," cried the 2 young Cratchits, who were everywhere at once. "Hide, mother, hide." So Martha hid herself, and in came little Bob, the father, with at least 3 feet of comforter exclusive of the fringe hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim! He bore a little crutch, and had his limbs supported by an iron frame.
Why, where's our Martha?
cried Bob Cratchit, looking around. "Not coming," said Mrs. Cratchit.
Not coming,
said Bob, with a sudden declension in his high spirits, for he had been Tim's blood horse all the way from church, and had come home rampant.
Not coming upon Christmas Day.
Martha didn't seem to like him disappointed, if it were only in joke, so she came out prematurely from behind the closet door, and ran into his arms, while the 2 young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim, and bore him off into the wash-house, that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper. "And how did little Tim behave?" asked Miss Cratchit, when she had rallied Bob on his credulity, and Bob had hugged his daughter to his heart's content.
As good as gold, and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful, sitting by himself so much, and thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me, coming home, he hoped the people saw him in church, because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant for them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk. and who made blind men see.
Bob's voice was tremulous when he told them this, and trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim was growing strong and hearty. His active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool before the fire, and while Bob, turning up his cuffs, as if, poor fellow, they were capable of being made more shabby, compounded some hot mixture in a jug with gin and lemons, and stirred it round and put it on the hob to simmer. Master Peter and the two ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession. Such a bustle ensured that you might have thought a goose the rarest of all birds, a feathered phenomena to which a black swan was a matter of course, and in truth it was something very like it in that house. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy ready beforehand in a little saucepan, hissing hot. Master Peter washed the potatoes with incredible vigor. Miss Belinda sweetened up the applesauce. Martha dusted the hot plates. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a tiny corner at the table. The two young Cratchits set chairs for everybody, not forgetting themselves, and mounting guard upon their posts, crammed spoons into their mouths, lest they shriek for goose before their turn came to be helped. At last the dishes were set on, and grace was said. It was succeeded by a breathless pause, as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it into the breast. But when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose all round the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the two young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handle of his knife, and feebly cried, "Hurrah!" There never was such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there ever was such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavor, size and cheapness, were the themes of universal admiration, eked out by applesauce and mashed potatoes. It was a sufficient dinner for the whole family indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of a bone upon the dish. They hadn't ate it all at last, yet every one had had enough, and the youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrows. But now, the plates being changed by Miss Belinda, Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witness, to take the pudding up and bring it in. Suppose it should not be done enough. Suppose it should break in turning out. Suppose somebody should have got over the wall of the backyard and stolen it while they were merry with the goose, a supposition at which the two young Cratchits became livid. All sorts of horrors were supposed. "Hello!" A great deal of steam. The pudding was out of the copper. A smell like washing day. That was the cloth. A smell like an eating house and pastry cooks next door to each other, with a laundresses next door to that, and that was the pudding. In half a minute Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed but smiling proudly, with the pudding like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing in half a quartern of ignited brandy, and bedight with Christmas holly stuck to the top. Oh, a wonderful pudding. Bob Cratchit said, and calmly too, that he regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Miss Cratchit since their marriage. Mrs. Cratchit said that now the weight was off her mind, she would confess she had her doubts about the quantity of flour. Everybody had something to say about it, but nobody said or thought it was at all a small pudding for a large family. It would have been flat heresy to do so. Annie Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. At last the dinner was all done, the cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. The compound in the jug being tasted and considered perfect. Apples and oranges were put upon the table, and a shovelful of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth in what Bob Cratchit called a circle, meaning half of one. And at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers, and a custard cup without a handle. Before we continue, I want to take a break real quick to thank Stefan for 20, who says, I couldn't see a Joe head on the stream thumbnail, so it must be early in the stream. Thank you very much, Stefan. That is going to put us right at our first Phase Gamer expansion milestone. So here we go. Expand the Ghost of Christmas Present, as well as me. Do. Oh, wait, I was going to say ho, 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 ho. So there we go. We are now in the lower left here, Mr. Hardluck and I. Anyone who would like to see the cameras get bigger, tips are welcome via paypal.me/JoeHills and YouTube Super Chat. And if you haven't seen Mr. Hardluck before, you can catch him at twitch.tv/Mr. Hardluck, which I'm posting in the chat now as well. So let's talk about this for a second. Like, I really appreciate, as I read this every year, what this era's idea of poverty is through the lens of what is considered riches. This family has their display of glass that they are so proud of. 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. Now, I don't know if a custard cup usually has a handle, and you can get a discount or like find one discarded if the handle breaks off, or if it's implied that the kids knocked one off there, or if maybe only really poor people bought custard cups without a handle. But wow, like, there's just something so visual about the way Dickens writes that I really appreciate. And so yeah, if you want to go ahead and tip via paypal.me/JoeHills, I'll go ahead and acknowledge that at the next good break in the text. Jill Jackson says it reminds me of a jam jar with a picture of Tom or Jerry on it. Oh my gosh. When I was a kid, did you have those?
I didn't have them, but I've seen them.
Yeah, I remember when we went to my grandma's house. My grandparents on one side of the family weren't particularly well off, and by which I mean, like, they had 3 kids and a 2-bedroom apartment. And so they, like, slept in the living room, and their kitchen was smaller than mine, if that's even possible. And, like, I remember my grandma always busted out the Tom and Jerry jam jars as cups for the kids when they visited, and that was a thing. But yeah, it's, you know, you can have a good life without being wealthy, and I like to think that my grandparents achieved that for themselves, and, you know, they were always proud of their kids. But yeah, you know, like, I mean, they definitely lived better than the Cratchits did, but, like, you know, it's not too far off, you know. But anyway, like, you know, and that's the sort of thing too, like, you know, you gotta realize, you know, I'm gonna get a little bit sentimental here for a second, but, like, you know, when we talk about charity, you know, part of that is writing checks and donating to charity. And I mean, I participate in charity drives. I donate to charity drives. I'm not saying they're a bad thing, but I do think that, you know, one of the themes of this is granting people opportunities. You know, like Fezziwig in what we read last night created opportunities for Scrooge, who came from nothing, and the other apprentice, and for all the people who worked for him, to improve their situation, and having a generosity of being willing to take a chance on people. And I'm not saying, like, you bet your company on one new hire here or there, but, like, you should help out people where you can, not just by giving them free stuff, but by giving them chances to do cool things for you or with you. Like, I feel like I was very lucky that a lot of people took chances on me, because even though I was obnoxious and loudmouthed, I seemed to work hard. And, there are going to be people who are going to be rough around the edges that you're going to meet, especially in their youth. That they might be applying for jobs or looking for a chance to do something, and I really hope you give them a chance. And that chance isn't just the job; it's also mentoring and fostering in some way. And sorry, I'm getting way off track here, but like, it's just the sort of thing that jumps out at me, like creating opportunities for others to succeed. I think is super important. And as we get reflective going into the Christmas season, I just want to encourage y'all, because I know we got viewers out there of all different age groups and things like that. Some of y'all are in positions where you're going to be making hiring decisions, or you're going to be trying to figure out who to work with in the future. And I hope that because like, it's easy to say like, oh yeah, this guy went to Yale and his dad is on the Supreme Court, so obviously we hire him, But like, I mean, that guy went to Yale and his dad's on the Supreme Court. He'll be fine. Like, there's a lot of people who never really had anything. And God, sorry.
Credentials are great, kid. Welcome to Starbucks.
Yeah, sorry. I try not to laugh during my streams because like it triggers my chronic cough. But yeah, like really just, going out there and giving people a chance could be really good. But okay. So, let's go ahead and move on. And I just want you to look at this story through the lens of opportunities, because the ghosts visiting Scrooge is an opportunity that Marley created for him. But what the ghost wants Scrooge to do is to create opportunities for happiness and success for others. And, I just like, this is my third year in a row reading this. I don't do a lot of prep for this. I don't read this the week before, like, cause I really want to be in the moment. And sorry, this is just jumping in and jumping out at me. But okay. So, once again, we're going to get back to the text. At Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers, and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug, however, as well as golden goblets would have done. And Bob served it out with beaming looks, while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and crackled noisily. Then Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us." Which all the family re-echoed. "God bless us, everyone," said Tiny Tim, the last of all. He sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held his withered little hand in his, as if he loved the child and wished to keep him by his side, and dreaded that he might be taken from him. "Spirit," said Scrooge, with an interest he had never felt before, "tell me if Tiny Tim will live."
"I see a vacant seat,"
replied the ghost,
"in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die."
No, no. Oh, no, kind spirit. Say he will be spared.
"If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my race will find him here. What then? If he be like to die, he had better do it and decrease the surplus population." Yeah.
Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the spirit, and overcome with penitence and grief.
Man,
Said the ghost.
if man you be in heart, not adamant, forbear that wicked cant until you have discovered what the surplus is and where it is. Will you decide what men shall live, what men shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven you are the most worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child. Oh God, to hear the insect on the leaf pronouncing on the too much life amongst his hungry brothers in the dust.
Scrooge bent before the ghost's rebuke, and trembling cast his eyes upon the ground, but he raised them speedily on hearing his own name.
Mr. Scrooge! I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast,
said Bob Cratchit. The founder of the feast, indeed, cried Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have a good appetite for it.
My dear, the children, Christmas Day.
It should be Christmas Day, I am sure, on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do, poor fellow.
My dear,
was Bob's mild answer.
Christmas Day?
I'll drink his health for your sake and the day's, not for his. Long life to him. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt. The children drank the toast after her. It was the first of their proceedings which had no heartiness. Tiny Tim drank it last of all, but he didn't care twopence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for a full 5 minutes. After it had passed away, they were 10 times merrier than before, from the mere relief of Scrooge the Baleful being done with. Bob Cratchit told them how he had a situation in his eye for Mr. Peter, which could bring in, if obtained, a full 5 and 6 pence weekly. The 2 young Cratchits laughed tremendously at the idea of Peter being a man of business, and Peter himself looked thoughtfully at the fire from between his collars, as if he were deliberating what particular investments he should favor when he came into the receipt of that bewildering income. Martha, who was a poor apprentice at a milliner's, then told them what kind of work she had to do, and how many hours she worked at stretch, and how she meant to lie abed tomorrow morning for a good long rest, tomorrow being a holiday she passed at home. Also, how she had seen a countess and a lord some days before, and how the lord was much about as tall as Peter, at which Peter pulled up his collar so high that you couldn't have seen his head if you had been there. All this time the chestnuts and the jug went round, and by they had a song about a lost child traveling in the snow, from Tiny Tim, who had such a plaintive little voice, and sang it very well indeed. There's nothing of a high mark in this. They were not a handsome family. They're not well-dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scanty, and Peter might have known, and very likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. And when they faded, and looked happier yet in the bright sprinklings of the spirit's torch at parting, Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially on Tiny Tim, until the last. By this time it was getting dark, and snowing pretty heavily, And as Scrooge and the spirit went along the streets, the brightness of the roaring fires in kitchens, parlors, and all sorts of rooms was wonderful. Here, the flickering of the blaze showed preparations for a cozy dinner, with hot plates baking through and through before the fire, and deep red curtains ready to be drawn to shut out cold and darkness. There, all the children of the house were running out into the snow to meet their married sisters, brothers, cousins, uncles, and aunts, to be the first to greet them. Here, again, were shadows on the window blind of guests assembling, and there, a group of handsome girls, all hooded and fur-booted, and all chattering at once, tripped lightly off to some near neighbor's house, where woe upon the single man who saw them enter. Artful witches, well, they knew it in a glow. But if you had judged from the numbers of people on their way to friendly gatherings, you might have thought that no one was at home to give them welcome when they got there, instead of every house expecting company and piling up its fires half chimney high. Blessings on it, how the ghost exulted, how it bared its breadth of breast, and opened its capacious palm, and floated on, outpouring with a generous hand its bright and harmless mirth on everything within its reach. The very lamplighter who ran on before, dotting the dusky street with specks of light, and who was dressed to spend the evening somewhere, laughed out loudly as the spirit passed, though little kenned the lamplighter that he had any company but Christmas. And now, without a word of warning from the ghost, they stood upon a bleak and desert moor, where monstrous masses of rude stone were cast about, as though it were the burial place of giants, and water spread itself wheresoever it listed, or it would have done so, but for the frost that held it prisoner, and nothing grew but moss and furze and coarse rank grass. Down in the west the setting sun had left a streak of fiery red, which glared upon the desolation for an instant, like a sullen eye, and frowning lower, lower yet, was lost in the thick gloom of darkest night. "What place is this?" asked Scrooge.
A place where miners live, who labor in the bowels of the earth.
Returned the
But they
spirit.
know me. See!
A light shone from the windows of a hut, and swiftly they advanced toward it. Passing through the wall of mud and stone, they found a cheerful company assembled around a glowing fire. An old man and woman, with their children and their children's children, and another generation beyond that, all decked out gaily in their holiday attire. The old man, in a voice that seldom rose above the howling of the wind upon the barren waste, was singing them a Christmas song. It had been a very old song when he was a boy, and from time to time they all joined in the chorus. So surely as they raised their voices, the old man got quite blithe and loud, and so surely as they stopped, his vigor sank again. The spirit did not tarry here, but bade Scrooge hold his robe, and passing on above the moor, sped whither? Not to see. To see! To Scrooge's horror, looking back, he saw the last of the land, a frightful range of rocks behind them, and his ears were deafened by the thundering of water as it rolled and roared and raged among the dreadful caverns it had worn, and fiercely tried to undermine the earth, built upon a dismal reef of sunken rocks some league or so from shore, on which the waters chafed and dashed the wild year through. There stood a solitary lighthouse. Great heaps of seaweed clung to its base, and storm-birds born of the wind of, one might suppose, as seaweed of the water, rose and fell about it. Like the waves they skimmed. But even here, 2 men who watched the light had made a fire that through the loophole in the thick stone wall shed out a ray of brightness on the awful sea.
Joining their horny hands over the rough table at which they sat, they wished each other Merry Christmas in their can of grog. And one of them, the elder too, with his face all damaged and scarred with hard weather, as the figurehead of an old ship might be, struck up a sturdy song that was like a gale in itself. Again the ghost sped on above the black and heaving sea, on, until being far away, as he told Scrooge, from any shore, they lighted on a ship. They stood beside the helmsman at the wheel, the lookout in the bow, the officers who had the watch, dark, ghostly figures in their several stations, but every man among them hummed a Christmas tune, or had a Christmas thought, or spoke below his breath to his companion of some bygone Christmas day, with homeward hopes belonging to it, and every man on board, waking or sleeping, good or bad, had a kinder word for another on that day than on any other day in the year, and had shared to some extent in its festivities, and had remembered those he cared for at a distance, and had known that they delighted to remember him. It was a great surprise to Scrooge, while listening to the moaning of the wind, and thinking what a solemn thing it was to move on through the lonely darkness over an unknown abyss, whose depths were secrets as profound as death. It was a great surprise to Scrooge, while thus engaged, to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room, with the spirit standing smiling by his side, and looking at that same nephew with approving affability. "Ha ha!" laughed Scrooge's nephew. "Ha ha ha! If you should happen, by any unlikely chance, to know a man more blessed in laugh than Scrooge's nephew, all I can say is, I should like to know him too. Introduce him to me, and I'll cultivate his acquaintance." Okay, I gotta say, y'all, I did not practice that laugh. That was probably, hopefully, the worst reading that I'll do the whole night. That I didn't have the nephew's laugh practiced, because once again, I literally do this live once a year. I feel like I get better at it every year, but wow, that... Oh no, he laughs more below. This is gonna get bad. Luckily, we have a fantastic tip that just rolled in from Olivier. Thank you very much for the 61, Olivier, who says, "I've never read A Christmas Carol before. It is lovely you take the time to read it to us. Thank you so much." You know, that's one of the funny things about a lot of the great works of literature that get adapted a million times, is you think you've seen all the adaptations, why go do the original? And I feel like the original, if it wasn't good, it wouldn't be adapted so many times. So let's visit it, at least once, or once a year in this case. So anyway, we got 3 face camera expansions to go. So thank you very much, Olivier, for that. Expand, Mr. Hardluck, and also Joe. Numero dos, expand us both. Dee. Numero tres, 2 bigger... Oh no, what did I grab there? That is not... Whatever that layer is not Hardluck or I. I don't know what that was, but when I unhide it later, it's going to be the wrong size. So thank you very much to Olivier for that. That puts us 19 away from the next face camera expansion. Tips are welcome, as always, via paypal.me/Joe Hills and YouTube Super Chat. Though I probably won't read them immediately, because I don't want to interrupt the story at a bad time. When I screw up a bad laugh, though, and I need to apologize, that's a good time to do it. Also, I'm not trying to say that the Muppet rendition or the Patrick Stewart rendition or whatever are bad adaptations. I'm just saying, if you enjoy the adaptations, you might enjoy the original. Like, because I will say, Hardluck, correct me if I'm wrong, because maybe you've seen adaptations I haven't. Every adaptation I've ever seen skips the lighthouse and the ship. I have never seen an adaptation with the ship or the lighthouse that we just read.
Neither have I. Yeah, those are wholly unfamiliar to me. I must not have been paying much attention last year when you were reading.
That's okay. I mean, everybody has the right to zone out. Like,
This is background entertainment. But I really... I understand why if you're editing down a 4-hour movie to a 3-hour movie, you cut that. But, like, you think about how many people, not just then, but in any era, work at sea. Like, it's meaningful for them to see that represented in a story about Christmas. Because it's not just a story about Christmas in London, right? It's a story about Christmas in the country. It's a story about Christmas at sea. It's a story about Christmas writ large, you know? And when you edit down that Christmas writ large, you still have Christmas in London, and that's a good story. But like, I like seeing the other options. People are asking why my opacity is higher than Hardluck's. Hardluck's chroma key setup is not as good as mine. No offense, Hardluck, but like, and so
I'm also already a ghost.
Yeah, so yeah. Also, he's playing a ghost, whereas I'm playing, everyone else. So, yeah. So anyway, thank you very much to everyone who's tipped so far. We're gonna go ahead and get back to the reading now, and so here we go. It is a fair, even-handed, noble adjustment of things that while there is infection in disease and sorrow, there is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humor. When Scrooge's nephew laughed in this way, holding his sides, rolling his head, and twisting his face into the most extravagant contortions, Scrooge's niece, by marriage, laughed as heartily as he, and their assembled friends, being not a bit behindhand, roared out lustily, "Ha ha 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 ha!" "He said that Christmas was a humbug, as I live!" cried Scrooge's nephew. "He believed it too!" "More shame for him, Fred," said Scrooge's niece indignantly. "Bless those women, they never did anything by halves. They are always in earnest." She was pretty, exceedingly pretty, with a dimpled, surprised-looking capital face, a ripe little mouth that seemed made to be kissed, as no doubt it was, and all kinds of little good dots about her chin that melted into one another when she laughed, and the sunniest pair of eyes you ever saw in any little creature's head. Although, altogether, she was what you would have called provoking, but satisfactory, too. Perfectly satisfactory. "He's a comical old fellow," said Scrooge's nephew. "That's the truth, but not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offences carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him." "I'm sure he is very rich, Fred," hinted Scrooge's niece. "At least you always tell me so." "What of that, my dear? His wealth is of no use to him. He doesn't do any good with it. He don't make himself comfortable with it. He hasn't the satisfaction of thinking that he's ever going to benefit us with it." "I have no patience with him," observed Scrooge's niece. Scrooge's niece's sisters, and all the other ladies, expressed the same opinion. "Oh, I have," said Scrooge's nephew. "I am sorry for him. I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Who suffers by his ill whims? Himself. Always. Here he takes it into his head to dislike us, and he won't come and dine with us. What's the consequence? He don't lose much of a dinner." "Indeed, I think he loses a very good dinner," interrupted Scrooge's niece. Everybody else said the same, and they must be allowed to have some competent judges, because they had all just had dinner, and with the dessert around the table, were clustered round the fire by lamplight. "Well, I am very glad to hear it," said Scrooge's nephew, "because I haven't great faith in these young housekeepers. What do you say, Topper?" Topper had clearly got his eye upon one of Scrooge's niece's sisters, for he answered that a bachelor was a wretched outcast who had no right to express an opinion on the subject. Whereat Scrooge's niece's sister, the plump one with the lace tucker, not the one with the roses, blushed. "Do go on, Fred," said Scrooge's niece, clapping her hands. "He never finishes what he begins to say. He is such a ridiculous fellow." Scrooge's nephew reveled in another laugh, and as it was impossible to keep the infection off, though the plump sister tried hard to do it with aromatic vinegar, his example was unanimously followed. "I was only going to say," said Scrooge's nephew, "that the consequence of taking a dislike to us and not making merry with us is, as I think, that he loses some pleasant moments, which could do him no harm. I am sure he loses pleasanter companions than he can find in his own thoughts, either in his mouldy old office or his dusty chambers. I mean to give him the same chance every year, whether he likes it or not. For I pity him. He may rail at Christmas until he dies, but he can't help thinking better of it. I defy him. If he finds me going there in good temper year after year, and saying, 'Uncle Scrooge, how are you?' if it only puts him in the vein to leave his poor clerk £50, that's something. And I think I shook him yesterday." It was their turn to laugh now at the notion of him shaking Scrooge, but being thoroughly good-natured, and not caring what they laughed at, so that they laughed at any rate, he encouraged them in their merriment, and passed the bottle joyously. After tea, they had some music, for they were a musical family, and knew what they were about. When they sang a glee or a catch, I can assure you, especially Topper, who could growl away in bass like a good one, and never swell the large veins on his forehead, or get red in the face over it. Scrooge's niece played well upon the harp, and played, among other tunes, a simple little air, a mere nothing, you might learn to whistle it in 2 minutes, which had been familiar to the child who fetched Scrooge from the boarding school, as he had been reminded by the ghost of Christmas past. When this strain of music sounded, all the things that the ghost had shown him came upon his mind. He softened more and more, and thought that if he could have listened to it often, years ago, he might have cultivated the kindnesses of life for his own happiness with his own hands, without resorting to the sexton's spade that buried Jacob Marley. But they didn't devote the whole evening to music. After a while, they played at forfeits, 'cause it's good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas, when its mighty founder was called a child himself. Stop! There was a game at Blind Man's Bluff. Of course there was. And I no more believe Topper was really blind than I believe he had eyes in his boots. My opinion is that it was a done thing between him and Scrooge's nephew, and that the ghost of Christmas Present knew it. The way he went after the plump sister in the lace tucker was an outrage on the credulity of human nature. Knocking down the fire irons, tumbling over the chairs, bumping against the piano, smothering himself among the curtains. Wherever she went, there went he. He always knew where the plump sister was. He wouldn't catch anybody else. If you had fallen up against him, as some of them did, on purpose, he would have made a feint of endeavoring to seize you, which would have been an affront to your understanding. It would have instantly sidled off in the direction of the plump sister. She often cried out that it wasn't fair, And it really was not. But when at last he caught her, when in spite of all her silken rustlings and her rapid flutterings past him, he got her into a corner whence there was no escape, then his conduct was the most execrable. For his pretending not to know her, pretending that it was necessary to touch her headdress, and further to assure himself of her identity by pressing a certain ring upon her finger and a certain chain about her neck, was vile, monstrous. No doubt she told him her opinion of it when, another blind man being in office, they were so very confidential together behind the curtains. Scrooge's niece was not one of the blind man's bluff party, but was made comfortable with a large chair and footstool in a snug corner, where the ghost and Scrooge were close behind her. But she joined in the forfeits, and loved her love to admiration with all the letters of the alphabet. Likewise, at that game of how, when, and where, she was very great, and, to the secret joy of Scrooge's nephew, beat her sisters hollow, though they were sharp girls too, as Topper could have told you. There might have been 20 people there, young and old, but they all played, and so did Scrooge, for wholly forgetting in the interest he had in what was going on, that his voice made no sound in their ears. He sometimes came out with his guess quite loud, and very often guessed right too. For the sharpest needle, best Whitechapel, warranted not to cut in the eye, was not sharper than Scrooge, blunt as he took it in his head to be. The ghost was greatly pleased to find him in this mood, and looked upon him with such favor that he begged like a boy to be allowed to stay until the guests departed. But the spirit said that could not be done. "Here's a new game! 1/2 hour! Spirit! Only one." It was a game called Yes and No, where Scrooge's nephew had to think of something, and the rest must find out what, he only answering to their questions yes or no, as the case was. The brisk fire of questioning to which he was exposed elicited from him that he was thinking of an animal, a live animal, rather a disagreeable animal, a savage animal, an animal that growled and grunted sometimes, talked sometimes, and lived in London, walked about the streets, and hadn't made a show of, and wasn't led by anybody, and didn't live in a menagerie, and was never killed in a market, and was not a horse, an ass, a cow, or a bull, or a tiger, or a dog, or a pig, or a cat, or a bear. At every fresh question that was put to him, the nephew burst into a fresh roar of laughter, and was so inexpressibly tickled that he was obliged to get up off the sofa and stamp. At last, the plump sister, falling into a similar state, cried out, "I found it out! I know what it is, Fred, I know what it is!" "What is it?" "It's your Uncle Scrooge!" Which it certainly was. Admiration was the universal sentiment, though some objected that the reply to "Is it a bear?" ought to have been yes, insomuch as an answer in the negative was sufficient to have diverted their thoughts away from Mr. Scrooge, supposing that they ever had any tendency that way. "He has given us plenty of merriment, I am sure," said Fred, "and it would be ungrateful not to drink to his health. Here is a glass of mulled wine ready to our hand at the moment, and I say, Uncle Scrooge." "Well, Uncle Scrooge," they cried, "a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man, whatever he is. He wouldn't take it from me, but may he have it nevertheless, Uncle Scrooge." Uncle Scrooge had imperceptibly become so gay and light of heart that he would have pledged the unconscious company in return, and thanked them in an audible speech, if the ghost had given him time. But the whole scene passed off in the breath of the last words spoken by his nephew, and he and his nephew were again upon their travels. Much they saw, and far they went. And many homes they visited, but always with happy end. The spirits stood beside sick beds, and they were cheerful. On foreign lands, and they were close at home. By struggling men, and they were patient in their greater hope. By poverty, and it was rich. In almshouse, hospital, and jail. In misery's every refuge, where a vain man in his little brief authority had not made fast the door and barred the spirit out, he left his blessing, and taught Scrooge his precepts. It was a long night, if it were only a night, but Scrooge has his doubts of this, because the Christmas holidays appeared to be condensed into the space of time they passed together. It was strange, too, that while Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older. Clearly older. Scrooge had observed this change, but never spoke of it, until they left a children's 12th night party. Looking at the spirit as they stood together in an open place, he noticed its hair was gray. "Are spirits' lives so short?" asked Scrooge.
My life upon this globe is very brief,
replied the ghost.
It ends tonight.
"Tonight?" cried Scrooge.
Tonight at midnight. Hark! The time is drawing near.
The chimes were ringing the 11:03 at that moment. "Forgive me if I am not justified in what I ask," said Scrooge, looking intently at the spirit's robe, "but I see something strange and not belonging to yourself protruding from your skirts. Is it a foot or a claw?"
It might be a claw for the flesh there upon it,
was the spirit's sorrowful reply.
Look here.
From the foldings of its robe it brought 2 children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at its feet and clung upon the outside of its garment.
Oh, man! Look here! Look down here!
They were a boy and a girl, yellow, meager, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate, too, in their humility, where graceful youth should have filled their features out and touched them with its freshest tints. A stale and shriveled hand, like that of age, had pinched and twisted them and pulled them into shreds. Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out menacing. No change, no degradation, no perversion of humanity in any grade. Through all the mysteries of wonderful creation has monsters half so horrible and dread. Scrooge startled back, appalled. Having them shown to him in this way, he tried to say they were fine children, but the words choked themselves rather than be parties to a lie of such enormous magnitude. "Spirit, are they yours?" Scrooge could say no more.
They are man,
said the spirit, looking down upon them.
And they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware of them both, and all of their degree. But most of all, beware this boy, for on his brow I see it written which is doom. Unless the writing be erased, deny it!
Cried the spirit, stretching out its hand toward the city.
Slander those who yell at ye. Admit it for your factious purposes, and make it worse, and bide the end.
Have they no refuge or a resource? Cried Scrooge.
Are there no prisons?
Said the spirit, turning on him for the last time with his own words.
Are there no workhouses?
The bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost, and saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. And that concludes Stave 3 of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. We'll continue with Stave 4 and 5, or Staves 4 and 5, on Wednesday evening. Tomorrow night, I'm going to be doing a pinball stream with my friend Art, who has some Guardians of the Galaxy cosplay stuff he's bringing over. We're going to be playing Guardians pinball. But before I talk about that, let's bring Hardluck back. Hardluck, I don't know if you realize that, but when the ghost disappeared, I took off your video. So now people can see you again.
I did not. But
okay.
Cool.
Everybody in chat was like, oh no, he's gone. So, I mean, that worked. Okay, but yeah, thank you so much for joining me. This was really fun.
It was. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, like, I had originally planned to do a big cast and have all the different voices done, and when I got sick, I was just like, okay, I knew I wanted to have Hardluck as a Ghost of Christmas Present. I knew I wanted Badger for Ghost of Christmas Past, and forget everybody else. We're doing it live. And you know what? Doing it live is fun. I do it live every night. I'm so grateful to you for coming out and putting on a good show. I'm going to go ahead and link your YouTube again for anybody that missed it. Hey, welcome Winnie T. Ford. Welcome everyone who's just joining us. We just wrapped up reading Stave 3 of A Christmas Carol. Mr. Hardluck, I'm going to keep the stream going for a little bit, but before you go, do you have any final words?
Just real quick, the YouTube link that I sent is specifically my wrestling YouTube. That is for my wrestling persona, Scott E. Stevens. And then the Twitch it will be me once I start Twitch streaming, hopefully after the beginning of the year. This was really awesome. Thank you for letting me come and do this. My throat isn't hurting as much as I thought it would. And
hey, it helps my throat to not have to read all the text, you know, so mine's better off too. So, okay, thank you so much for joining us again, Mr. Hardluck, and keep adventuring.
Good night, everybody.
Night, Mr. Hardluck. And we are going to keep the stream going. I still need to go measure the moon and do some Minecraft stuff. Bubble Boom says, it makes sense now why you sounded like the boulder from Avatar. Wrestling. Yep, Mr. Hardluck is a wrestler in the Ohio area. Oh my gosh. This is kind of like, you know, a lot. Can we get to the measurement hut before it gets dark? I'm kind of dubious about that. We might need to go to bed and then travel over there. But we want to get at least one measurement in tonight. Oh boy. Sorry for the frame rate, folks. It seems like the server being tore up from the floor up is not optimal. But yeah, I hope that y'all enjoyed the Christmas Carol. This is one of my favorite little traditions. Whoops, that was the Hardluck link again. I was gonna say, if you like the show and didn't want to interrupt the story, now's a good time to tip. Tips are welcome via paypal.me/JoeHills and YouTube Super Chat. So the first year that I read the Christmas Carol, it was a Patreon Discord only thing, and I think there were maybe like 6 to 12 people there. Because I didn't know if it would work, and I kind of didn't know if I actually had the energy to like read the whole thing and stuff. And so here's the other thing is, so the first time I did this, I mixed it up. I started reading A Christmas Carol, but when there were certain breaks in the text that like gave a change of point of view, I would jump over and read Problem Sleuth instead. And every time Problem Sleuth had a change in point of view, I would jump back to A Christmas Carol. And I can't do that on stream because Problem Sleuth is still in copyright. And I'm not sure that that's a sufficient remix to justify, what do you call that? What's that thing where you redo something? Hold on, I gotta talk to Scar real quick. Okay. But what was I going to say? Transformative work. Thank you, Jill Jackson. I'm not sure it's enough of a transformative work to get away with. But if you ever get the chance to read A Christmas Carol and Problem Sleuth together to your friends and loved ones, it's a real hoot. Okay. I think we only got 2 hours into it. We didn't do the whole thing because that would be insane. Because Problem Sleuth is incredibly long, and so is A Christmas Carol. As you can see, Staves 1 and 2 of A Christmas Carol took us about 2 hours last night, and Stave 3 alone took us 80 minutes to stuff. So Scar's gonna let it slide that I forgot to greet him. So that's always nice. DJ Frogtime says, "Howdy, Hardluck. I enjoyed your facial acting because you were very expressive." And Rosewolf says, "Hardluck, you were amazing." I know. I am so glad that this worked out. Like, I literally... Like, I had all these big plans for the Christmas Carol this year. I was going to try and do it, like, at a grand scale. And I had to dial it back. And I was, like, literally last night... before I did it, before I started last night, I was like, I don't even know if I have the energy to do it this year. Like, maybe I should just skip. And I'm like, no. I'm gonna sit down. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna power through. Badger's gonna help me tonight. Maybe I can get Hardluck to help me tomorrow. So like I said, I was texting or Discord messaging Hardluck as the stream was starting last night, being like, hey, are you get busy tomorrow? I really want you to be on the stream. So, Hardluck says, I was looking forward to this for weeks. Yeah, that's the thing, is I had talked to Hardluck about this like a month ago, but we had never like confirmed it or like locked down dates or times. And so it's nice when things do turn out okay. So we're going to wait for the sun to set and the moon to rise. We need to go ahead. We got more signs. Okay, great. We're going to get some ink sacs out here. Okay, cool. Oh, boy. But, yeah. I really, like I said, I don't think that this is one of those books that, like, I could read every week and be like, oh, man, this is great. But, like, once a year, as you approach Christmas, revisiting it, there's a lot of humor in it, but there's also just, like, a lot of really descriptive writing. Like, descriptive to the point that it's almost like describing like film transitions and stuff like that, or it's just really cool how not just visual it is, but physical, or it like you have a sense of movement as the ghost pulls Scrooge around and like over the sea and stuff. I don't know. It's just really interesting. Like, because you could assume, like, oh, yeah, Dickens, he wrote, 2 centuries ago. How could he be any good? It's like, there's a reason people are still reading them, You can learn from classic literature. And that doesn't mean that all of it's equally valid or equally good, but this is one piece that I find is amusing to me to visit once a year. Oh, boy. Oh. So I didn't want to overdo it on caffeine tonight, since I had a bunch of Red Bull last night before the stream, because I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I got to power up. And whereas tonight I'm like, I want to go to bed at a reasonable hour, because I have a craft stream with Cleo at 8:30 tomorrow morning. We had to move our, what do you call it? We had to move our Wednesday craft stream to Monday because of some holiday stuff coming up. And so Cleo and I are going to be hanging out and doing crafts tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. So I'm not going to be streaming super late. But we do want to get at least one moon measurement in. It's pretty shaky here. Oh, I saw that Mahi Zero was asking if I was breaking because I was reading his jokes or riffs. No, I actually Like, usually if I was distracted or whatever, it was because I was trying to look at my alerts for tips and then seeing, like, other emails come in, or I was reading the chats, like, but, like, it wasn't, no, you didn't get me, sorry. And I'm not saying you weren't funny, I'm just saying that, like, if you go back and try to, like, prove that you made me laugh, I don't think the timing is going to line up with the stream delay. So I don't want you to be disappointed. Okay. Where's that? Come on, son, just go set. Oh, boy. DJ Frogtime says it's hard to read chat while reading the book. Mostly, I was just skimming to make sure that like the adult spam bots weren't showing up. You know, because like I didn't hire a moderator for tonight because I was like, I think I can watch the chat, and I think I did an okay job. Okay, here we go. Here comes the moon. Let's get rid of our overlay here. Start recording. Face camera off. And I don't know if I'm going to use this footage or not, but I feel like I should be recording it just in case. Joe doesn't play violin, raiding with a party of 39. Howdy, y'all. Joe Hills here, recording as I always do in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm playing on the HermitCraft server. We're having some lunar abnormalities at the moment, which I'm trying to measure with this sky measurement aperture. Like, basically, when I built this thing, I had to go back to here to see the moon between those two posts. But now the moon is wider than those two posts. And I've been marking the days that occurs. But yeah, welcome, Raiders. Joe, I hope you had a pleasant stream earlier. We are just trying to create a usable way to measure the moon because it looks bigger than it should be. It looks like it should be about that size, and it's not that size. It's this size. Apparently, too, I've talked to people on other SMPs. This does not seem to be happening to them. This is a relatively local phenomena. I haven't talked to people running SMPs with the same seed as ours. But I guess technically my Patreon server is the same size as this, and nobody's complained. So that's something. But anyway, let's go ahead and set that up there. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, so it looks like we are still December 19th in the middle of the block. What time is it? 10:30 p.m. So that's 22:30 U.S. Central. Middle of block. Done. Light it up. Okay. So that's good. The moon's not getting any bigger. Still seems, you know, pretty big, but probably somebody else's problem. Okay. So, wow, I'm kind of worn out from just reading 80 minutes of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. So, I think we're going to go ahead and see who else we can raid tonight. Apologies to the Joe Doesn't Play Violin raiders who just came in. But, like I said, I have just been, what do you call it? I've just been reading A Christmas Carol for almost an hour and a half, and my brain is fried. And I just did the one thing I had to do in Minecraft. So, I think what we're going to do is we're going to raid IE Pinball, who is playing Godzilla right now. I actually met IE Pinball through the VR community playing mini golf together. Seems like a pretty cool gentleman who streams mostly pinball stuff, but is a cool all-around person. I hope you give him a try. When you get over there, say howdy, y'all. Joe Hills Raid here. And until next time, y'all, this is Joe Hills from Nashville, Tennessee. I forgot to turn the camera back on after I finished the recording. There I am. Hi, it's me. Okay, yeah. What was that other thing I say? Oh, yeah.
Merry Christmas to all, and to all, keep adventuring. Do. Stop streaming.